7 things you may not know about Ferrari. If you think of a colour to do with Ferrari, you probably think of red, but there was a time in which they raced in blue. In 1962, Ferrari homologated their 250 GTO for the GT race series. This required the factory to build 100 road cars, which they simply didn't have the means to do. However, Enzo had a plan, and the story goes that he took the FIA inspectors to see small groups of 250s before moving on to another area to see more. Sounds fine, right? Well, Enzo was having the few 250s he did have quickly moved to a different area of the factory while he and the representatives were on their way, making it seem like they had built the full 100. The homologation was approved, but the FIA had suspicions when so few 250 road cars were being seen on the market. A lot of this is said to be myth, but in 1964, when Ferrari wanted to homologate another car, the FIA declined them, and Italy's national motorsport body did too. In a fit of rage, Enzo handed in his racing license and swore to never race in red again. This caused a stir as race cars in the 60s raced in their national colours, not in their liveries. The final event of the season saw Enzo come true on his word. 2 Ferraris lined up on the grid wearing blue and white to represent the US track they were racing on. The last car to ever receive Enzo's approval. Enzo approved every Ferrari model to ever leave the factory, and the last car to ever receive the founder's blessing was the F40. If there was ever a final car to see your company build, the F40 was undoubtedly a high note. The F40 was one of the original poster cars, and is still loved and adored by fans all across the world. The meaning behind the logo. In 1923, while at a track in Italy, Enzo Ferrari met Countess Paolina, the mother of the famous fighter pilot Baracca. The pilot had 34 victorious duels under his belt and was a national hero. The pilot painted a prancing horse on the side of every plane he flew for good luck, and the Countess suggested that Enzo paint the horse on his race cars too. Some 9 years later, at the 1932 Spa 24-hour race, Enzo painted the prancing horse on his cars, with a yellow background to signify his birthplace of Modena. Enzo's team won the race, and he carried on adorning the prancing horse from that moment on. Enzo was only in it for the racing. Enzo was a straight-shooting man. He said what he believed and didn't care if that was going to upset anyone. He believed that the only thing worth pursuing was racing, and that a car could only be beautiful once it had won a race. These beliefs often got him into trouble with customers, who Enzo would openly tell he didn't care about their cars and that they were rich playboys who had too much money. Enzo stated that he only created the road cars to fund his racing habit, and he meant it. The Ferrari-Ford deal. You may see Ferrari as an incredibly successful brand, but in the early 60s they were struggling badly. The company didn't have enough money to stay afloat, so started to consider selling part of it off. Enter Henry Ford II, president of the Ford Motor Company, who had plans to buy Ferrari, inject the company with money, and keep the prancing horse going. Talk started, and everything seemed to be going fine until Enzo noticed that in the contract Ford wanted control of the racing team. Enzo couldn't care less about the road cars, but the race team was his baby. Ford refused to budge, and Enzo famously stood up from the meeting with 14 Ford delegators, asked if his secretary wanted to go get something to eat, and walked out, abandoning the deal and leaving Ferrari in a very precarious position. Henry Ford II, so enraged by what Enzo had done, went to his team in the US, gave them a blank check and one mission: build me a race car that will beat Ferrari at Le Mans. 1 year later, the Ford GT40 was born. The reason not all Ferraris are V12s. When you think of Ferraris, you think of soulful V12s. However, they've had their fair share of incredible V8s and V6s too, and that's thanks to Enzo's son Dino. Dino had been researching V6 technology in his early life before passing away at the age of 24 due to muscular dystrophy. In a tribute to his son, Enzo dropped his marriage to the V12s and furthered his son's research. This resulted in the first ever Ferrari to feature an engine other than a V12, the 1966 Dino 204S race car, powered by a 2-litre V6 making 220 horsepower. Ferruccio Lamborghini vs Enzo Ferrari. In 1958, Ferruccio Lamborghini, the then famous tractor builder, bought a Ferrari 250 GT from Ferrari. After a short period of time, Ferruccio noticed that the clutch was constantly going wrong. In the end, Ferruccio got so angry that he contacted Enzo Ferrari himself to complain, but was met with the famous line, "What does a tractor maker know about cars? You stick to building tractors, I'll stick to building cars." And the rest is history.